What is going on, everybody? It's James with jamesyoungphotography.com, and in today's tutorial, we're gonna take a look at how I edited this portrait taken in an arcade with all these neon lights, and this is going to be the final edit that we are going to land on, okay? This edit is all about deep cinematic contrast. We're going with some moody blacks and a refined color grade, all while keeping a more natural kind of look to this image. The goal here is to enhance the atmosphere while keeping details crisp and the colors balanced. And look, just as a reminder, you can download this raw file for free and follow along step by step so that you can get these exact results. Or you can take this edit in any direction that you see fit. You know, we're gonna go with a cinematic look, but I would love to see what style that you edit this in. So if you edit this photo, make sure to tag me when you post it, okay? We have a lot of fun when people share their edits and we learn together. So let's take a look at this final edit and let's start breaking this thing down. Like we mentioned, we want to land with this kind of deep cinematic contrast with a refined color grade to it so that it really looks like a frame in a movie, almost like inspired by like Stranger Things or like Inception, something like that. So really fun colors, but we want to do it while preserving our skin tones and making our skin tones look really good. So let's get started. I'm just gonna click on reset and we're gonna start off by analyzing our composition. Now, when I say analyze my composition, what I'm doing is I'm gonna click here on the crop tool. And if you're super fancy, you can click R on your keyboard and it's gonna open up the crop tool. Now with my crop tool, I have my thirds grid already on. And what's cool about Lightroom is you can actually cycle through different grids by pressing O on your keyboard, and you can actually find different compositions in your photo just by cycling through the grid options. But for this photo, I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to use my thirds grid and I'm going to center our model's face right in the center of the photo. And I'm going to have her nose kind of intersecting a little bit on the top grid line of this thirds crop tool. So I like where this landed. So I'm going to hit close and get out of the crop tool. And we can see that our composition is a little bit tighter. There's a little bit more intention now behind the composition. We have somewhere for our eyes to comfortably land. Now, this is when I start experimenting with what type of color direction or what type of vibe that I want to start creating with my edit. And even when I'm looking at this now, I'm like, maybe I want to move my composition a little bit this way. There we go. We'll hit enter. See, it's all about experimenting. When I'm thinking about what type of color direction I want to take the edit, I start going through my preset playground, okay? And what's cool here is that each one of these has been created in a way that is very, very, very gentle with skin tones in particular. All of these presets are really made with portraits in mind, so they're not going to do anything crazy. And so I start going through the different looks that can be created with this preset pack. I kind of like Forks, Washington. That looks kind of nice, but I know I'm gonna land right here on date night, the cinematic vibe. If we keep looking, like I said, each one of these actually looks really cool. This is why I urge you to download these raw files and experiment with me, because you can take this in almost any direction. But for today, we want to start on 04 date night cinematic vibe. I really like this. So let's break down what our starting point kind of looks like. We've turned down the contrast just a little bit to give it a little bit of a softer look. We've also reduced our highlights just a little bit This also starts off by opening our shadows just a little bit. We get a little bit of texture. We reduce clarity just a little bit. Again, we want this to kind of look like a movie. That's where we get that cinematic vibe from. Now we'll get into more of these colors on the lower end of the develop module as we go through this edit. But now that we have our base preset applied, now it's time to start editing our color temperature, our exposure, and some of our contrast, okay? So let's get started by adjusting the base layer, if you will, of the color. And we do that with the white balance or the temperature slider here in the basic section of the develop module. And so I'm going to click and drag because I know I want this to be a little bit warmer. So I'm going to click and drag to the right. See, if I drag to the left, it's going to make my image a little bit more colder or more blue. And so, like I said, we want this to be a little bit more warm, or we want to introduce more yellows and oranges into the exposure. So we're going to start sliding the slider over to the right. And this is a little bit more about feeling what the photo looks like. And I like it about here. For this edit, we're looking at about 6,000, almost 6,100. And you can see here, the skin tones are a lot warmer. Now, the next thing I notice is I think I want just a tiny bit more contrast. So I'm going to raise my contrast from -9 to about, like, let's say -4. And you can see these are real subtle adjustments, right? If I Command Z, undo that, and I Command Shift Z, redo that, you can see these are very, very subtle changes that we're making. But you'll see how these subtle changes, they really add up and create a beautiful edit because we experimented. Now, the next thing I notice is these highlights have come down because that's typically what we like with cinematic edits. But because of the context of this photo, right, there are already lots of highlights. We actually want to accentuate that. So instead of -28 on highlights, I'm going to double click to reset the highlights slider. Now it's at 0. I'm actually going to raise the highlights like a tad, like maybe like +4, right? Something really subtle. And if I go to my history and I undo what I did with highlights, and then I redo what I did with highlights, you can see these are more just very subtle changes. And the next thing I'm noticing now is that maybe my shadows are just a little bit too high. So I want to bring those down just a little bit. I'm seeing that these shadows here, they seem really bright and they could be a little bit darker. So let's lower these down to about maybe +21. Again, if we undo that and we redo that, such a subtle change, but you'll see these changes add up. I kind of like where the whites are at because they're already super bright and there's already some overexposed clipped whites here. Our preset already hooked us up with a little bit of texture and reduced a little bit of clarity. Clarity represents mid-tone contrast, okay? So we can actually demo what that does by reducing it all the way. You could see it starts to get hazy and kind of strange looking. That's because all of the contrast from the midtones has been removed. So if we undo that, you can see we're kind of back to home base. And if we slide the slider all the way to the right, now we have maximum contrast in the midtones. And this is basically the equal opposite of -100. It also looks gross. So now you know what it does, but we're going to take down the clarity just a little bit, -4. Dehaze does a similar thing, but it introduces haze into the image as you slide left, and it cuts the haze as you slide to the right. Now, I like the slight haze that has been created, and it supports that feeling of being in a movie. So remember, we started with our cinematic preset, and we want to make choices that keep supporting the idea of having this edit look like it's taking place in a movie. And now really thinking about it, I'm like, let's add some more texture because why not? That'll continue to give it that almost shot on a film kind of movie feel. So you can see if we remove the texture and then we add the texture back in, again, these are subtle changes. Now we'll get back to this tone curve in a minute, but I want to start taking a look a little bit at our color mixers and start switching up the sauce just a little bit, but not much. Now in our hues, I know we want to largely keep these the same. I already like the way that these are dialed because a lot of these are dialed in for skin tones and keeping cold tones in the shadows, keeping that cinematic kind of look and that separation in the highlights. Now, one thing I do want to do is lean into some of the purple tones that are taking place already in this environment. And so what I'm going to do is hone in on this saturation section here and click and drag a little bit to the right. And that's going to start bringing out our purples just a little bit more. It gives it just a tiny bit more punch. Again, we're making subtle changes here. Very few singular changes are going to be big changes in and of themselves. Now we're going to do a similar thing to the purple slider in the luminance. And the luminance section represents how bright that particular color is. So you can see we've already added quite a bit of luminance from the preset, but we're just going to add just a tiny bit more, like maybe like plus 28. And now our purples are looking awesome. So really what we're trying to do is refine the color separation for a true cinematic look. We're enhancing skin tones while keeping the cool shadows like nice and clean. And we're having like subtle but very impactful film inspired color balances here. Now we've already dialed in our color grading here on the split toning. If you want a full breakdown on the split toning section, let me know for color grading, but we didn't make any changes here because these are just seriously just perfectly dialed in already. From here, as we get to the details slider, I'm actually going to adjust the sharpening mask of this by clicking and holding the Option key. Now, this is going to show me in white everything that is being sharpened by the mask. So I'm going to reduce this mask a little bit to the left. And what that means is more pixels are being sharpened by that sharpening by the amount of 70 right there. And so you can see now we have a little bit more sharpening effect taking place on the face. Now that my colors and my edit, I feel like this is completely dialed in. This looks like a movie. Now I really want to do a couple of fine-tuning things and experiment with a couple of things to really round out this edit. And the first thing I want to do is actually turn my lens corrections off. So let's see with that on again. And I'm just using these adjustment options here in the preset playground. You could obviously turn this off and on by scrolling way down. Like, I don't know. For me, scrolling through all these sliders is a huge drag. So I like to experiment just by turning these on and off real simply. And I actually like it with the lens corrections off. And then another thing I'm going to do is, like I said, we want to have this have kind of a cinematic feel, almost like it was, like I said, pulled from a movie clip. So another thing I want to do is kind of like play with my grain levels a little bit. And again, you can like scroll down and like screw with the grain or like find the grain sliders, but I always have a hard time scrolling through everything. So I have like a couple of really cool preset ones that are not gonna ruin your edit or anything. These are just adjustment layers kind of. They just dial in the grain amounts. And like, let's say I was like, oh, you know, I hate everything I've done with the grain. I could just remove all of it real quick. And then like, we're back to square one. But I think we're gonna do fine and rough, because that gives it like that movie feel. And you could even go really cinematic too. Like, let me know if you want like, let me know if you want a breakdown about like cropping and different like cropping techniques, different like a full cropping breakdown of like how I see composition and stuff. because if you were to do something like this on this edit, like a 16:9, goodness gracious, like let me go full screen on that piece. Like this looks crazy. Like this, a 16:9, I mean, this would be something that you would see in a movie theater. But let's go ahead and go back to the original, like the as shot composition. We'll crop it back down to kind of the way it was. Boom. I like that. And like I said, that's the final edit. And that's where I landed on things. I think that this is sick, but it could have easily gone in like other directions. You can see all these other bass presets are absolutely fire. Like I think doing a watermelon sugar vibe on this would have been absolutely insane too. So show me what you edited. Like definitely post those up, tag me in them. Like I think it's so fun. If you need the preset pack, obviously you can click links in the description. You can get the preset pack, follow along, download the free raw files. And so if you haven't subscribed and followed and done all that stuff, like do all of the things that help this channel grow, you know what to do. I'm James Young with James Young Photography, and this is
Teach me how to Lightroom, yes indeed. Perfect balance every need. Crops align lines that lead. Gallery vibes, art to feed. Grain adding texture, old school style. Frames on fire, photo file. Split tone and shadows, highlights gold. Transform raw, a story told.